Order. I call to order today's Defence Committee evidence session on the work of the Chief of the Defence Staff. May I say, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you back and thank you for appearing before the committee again. And it is with some excitement as well as some sadness, because I believe this may well be your last evidence session with the Defence Committee. We are going to very much miss you. So thank you for your incredible service to the country, and thank you for also being available to give evidence to the Defence Committee. Right, without further...
Very kind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. And yes, without further ado, I shall now move on to our questions. So we've got a couple of hours, I anticipate, before the next vote, which could be at around 5 o'clock. Admiral, can you just explain to us what has been your role? We've seen the Strategic Defence Review, which has now been published. What's your role been in the costing and the commitments contained within the SDR and making sure that they are affordable within the 2.5% to 3% envelope?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All the chiefs and the Permanent Secretary have been involved with the SDR as it's being formed. So I think it's a different SDR in terms of having an externally led team. I think we've been comfortable with that. I think there's a freshness to that. We recognise that was the government's position from the outset. So this, and the team that did it have been very good in saying this is not being done to us, this is being done with us. And I think we've been reassured by the report and that those submissions and where the chiefs are and what they would want to see in it. It feels comfortable in that way. Then you get, as you say, to the hard bit of, like, how does this all map together in terms of the money? And again, we've been involved in that, and that then has been the final elements before you can be comfortable for the Defence Secretary to announce the review. That's been done with the Permanent Secretary and with the Finance Department and with the Capability Department. And then we've helped the government to take some of the difficult decisions that go with that. So how much can you do in terms of some of those new aspirations? What's your time frame for this? So it can't all be done in the first few years. And therefore, how do you manage those balances? That's only partial, because we've also said that the detail will come later this year with the Defence Investment Plan. That's, again, it's a variation. In the past, we would have an equipment plan and we'd focus on an equipment plan. The government's clear that they want to take a bigger approach. So it's a pan-defence investment plan. So people, infrastructure, your new capabilities, and how do you service your existing capabilities? And can we do that as a singular conversation, which again feels the right way to do things?
Okay. Well, look, Admiral, you've mentioned around the 2.5% to 3%. But seriously, is that enough? Do you feel some sense of anger or frustration that the SDR that's been published is in effect out of date already? Because it is my understanding that we will be compelled by NATO, in particular our American allies, to move to a 5% funding model. So do you feel that sense of anger or frustration about the outdating of the document that's already been published?
I mean, this may be a reflection of lots of other previous defence reviews which have tended to be talking about cuts. So I'm in a very different position. So this is the first defence review that I've seen that has got such clarity that this is the end of the peace dividend. Yeah. And that we have a increase over the next few years to 2.5%. And that's going to be tough through the 2020s. They're going to continue to be tough decisions. And then we have the increased ambition as we grow to 3% by 2034-35. And then I recognise that there's a further backdrop within NATO and that conversation that's going on, which might mean that the ambition for spending goes higher. And we have a defence review that sets the vision, the direction and what we need to do. And if there is an increase in spending, then it means what we plan to do will be done much quicker and in a more substantial way. So this doesn't... So when you say, am I angry or frustrated, this is a slightly different position for I think most CDSs after a defence review, but it's based on that shift of the end of the peace dividend and what it feels to me, and I think I've been consistent on this in various speeches and so on, that this is a shifting era, and this is going to be something that goes all the way through the 2030s, and it's part of a big national conversation. And it's a part of a substantial response to the geopolitical challenges that we face.
But Admiral, you've talked about ambitions which need to be achieved, but ultimately many of us knew that there's a change of administration. We knew the direction of travel of the Trump administration. We knew about what Russia was doing with its illegal invasion and how it was arming to the hilt, and now it's spending well in excess of 40% of its budget on defence. So what I'm positing to yourself, and why I feel that anger and frustration may be there, and maybe you do want to articulate that, but that the SDR process wasn't ambitious enough at the outset.
So I think it is ambitious. It affirms the programme that we had, which is extraordinarily ambitious. The UK is renewing its nuclear deterrent. We are recapitalising the army, and we desperately need to do that and get on with it. That's over 40 billion. We're investing in enormous projects like AUKUS, and we are retaining an ambition for projects like GCAP and the 6th generation fighter. That's all affirmed, and the importance of nuclear going forwards. We then recognise that we need to modernise and embrace technology in a much stronger way. We've been to the fore in terms of supporting Ukraine with their fight, and we've got lots of lessons to learn from that and to embrace and to take those on. And we also recognise that we've got this extraordinary industry and innovation that is a part of the UK, and we need to harness that more strongly. And we need to have a stronger conversation with society to make them aware of the threats that we face. That's the core of the defence review, and it's also that we've got strong armed forces now, but we need to be even stronger, and that's the ambition that's in the review.
But look, the government's own introduction to the Strategic Defence Review outlines, and I quote, costed with an increased defence budget of 2.5% of GDP from April 2027 and 3% in the 2030s, subject to economic and fiscal conditions. So even then, we've got a lot of caveats. And when NATO and our American allies and others are pushing us towards 3.5% on just military hardware, supplemented by 1.5% on other issues, we're operating in that caveat mode. Do you think that shows that ambition that should be there in order to meet the threats of today?
So the planning guidance that I have is based on that 2.5% in 2027 and to plan around 3% in 34-35. That gives me a certain assurance that allows us to progress the ambition that's in the defence review. The debate about whether we go to 3.5 or 5%, I've got to leave to the Prime Minister and to the wider government. Yeah. And then we have a defence review that if the spending level is increased, then we've got a direction to apply that additional spending to. I don't think it's for me to start to say what the answer will be from a NATO summit that's just a couple of weeks away, and you'll forgive me, and especially when it's the government spending review tomorrow. But I can assure you that's where we are at the moment in terms of 2.5% and an ambition to 3%. And what it does mean is that we continue with the existing programme and we make some progress in the 2020s, but the really significant progress is in the 2030s when we're heading to 3%. And I think that's just being honest with you in terms of what that fiscal constraint means.
You have been very diplomatic. No doubt members, including myself, will keep pushing on this point just to make sure that we are meeting the moment. But I believe my colleague Lincoln Jopp wanted to come in on this.
Admiral, when I used to work in the Ministry of Defence, when one of these was produced, my boss, General Simon Mayle, always used to say, Lincoln, where are the down arrows?
Yes.
And I've read this, and there aren't any. And there clearly will be down arrows for certain capabilities and certain structures, and but it's very difficult to get at that information at the moment. And I wondered if you could broadly suggest where those down arrows might be.
So I think there are very few down arrows, and in a way I welcome that. So I welcome the ambition of the review. I acknowledge that what that means is that there is considerable financial pressure with a review that doesn't have a particularly large down arrow. People will talk to an adjustment in policy terms of the language that we've used in the past of persistent engagement. So how many of your forces do you have around the world on a persistent basis? And that the focus on NATO and particularly in Northwest Europe might mean a little bit more geographical focus in the Euro-Atlantic and slightly less further abroad. That is not a substantial down arrow because we don't spend that much money, whether it's in the Gulf or in the Indo-Pacific. So the ambition versus resource is very, very tight. That's especially true in the 2020s. That's why some of the projects that are being talked about in terms of the new aspects, if you call those marquee projects, they are definitely signposting the way forward. We need to have a stronger industrial base for the likes of ammunition, so the 6 factories. We need more lethality, so the 7,000 cruise missiles. We need more in terms of artificial intelligence autonomy. Those tend to be in single billions, and then they will get stronger in the 2030s. So that's where the ambition versus resource is being played out. Those could be much thicker if there was more money. There isn't any more money because you've got an existing programme that's quite ambitious. Then you've got these new elements, and then it gets stronger in the 2030s.
And if I may, Chair, when we had Lord Robertson and General Barron sitting there at the beginning of this process, they said 2 very important things. The first was that they had been told that they were not required to seek consensus in the building, and secondly, they had no obligation to fill in holes in legacy programmes. We read in the newspapers that the version we've got here is version 12. Can you just give us a sense of, not specifics, but the one that was delivered to the one that we've got now, was there quite an iterative process to come to the final version?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I may not have followed every iteration. I think I followed it closely from start to finish, and once it was being formulated as a distinct product earlier this year. The themes have been incredibly consistent and very, very clear, and they're the themes and I don't think they're particularly surprising themes. A geopolitical reflection that the world's got more dangerous, a clarity that our armed forces need to be stronger, a clarity about embracing technology, a stronger relationship with industry, a stronger relationship with society about these concerns. The elements where there might have been the final pieces were very much in the resource debate, and you see that in the recommendations. There are some recommendations that are very distinct. So we want X by this date. There are some other recommendations which are much more generic, and they reflect, well, actually, we'll have a defence investment plan, and that will be a conversation sort of this summer and in the autumn. That will then be able to say to you, right, how do we turn those generics into specifics? And I think the crucial thing is, okay, when is that going to happen? But that's also part of an honesty of not showering the defence review with lots of wonderful promises and up arrows, and knowing that they're not affordable. So I think it's got a clarity about it in terms of where we're going. It's got an honesty about what we can afford, and it's got the ability to be even stronger if there's more money.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Armed Forces Readiness now with my colleague Derek Twigg.
CDS, can I ask you, and it's particularly opportune given that you're coming towards the end of your tenure now, and clearly your experience over the years, not least as CDS, gives you a very great overview of what's happening in terms of the three elements of our armed forces. I just wonder what your view is about the actual readiness of each of our armed forces in terms of the Army, Navy and the Air Force. What's your assessment currently of their war readiness?
So the war readiness, we are ready to fight. We're always ready to fight. We recognise, though, that we need to be even stronger in the future. The way that I look at it, the Air Force has gone through the strongest recapitalisation programme, and you're seeing that. So whether it's the shift from 4th generation to 5th generation, the A400M, the arrival of Protector, and some of the investment in the Air Force's bases, that feels the strongest. The Navy is halfway through its recapitalisation programme, and that feels quite tough. So it's...
What do you mean tough?
It's tough in the sense of you've got some frigates that are really old and coming to the end of their life. They're due to be replaced. The replacements aren't quite ready, and so you're in a difficult transition. The good news is that there are, it's 21 or 22 ships and submarines either in build or on order. So that is going in the right direction. And then the Army is at the very inception of a recapitalisation programme, and that's the one that needs to get going and then is on a 10-year journey so that we can meet our NATO responsibilities in the 2030s. So that's how I see each of the services. Then if you I think the correct way to look at that is to put that in the guise of NATO and what is going on within NATO and what are the threats that we face. And when I put it into NATO, I see an extraordinarily strong alliance that is getting even stronger. So since 2014, about an extra 600 billion euros, predominantly from European countries. You now see NATO getting stronger in investment terms by about 70 to 80 billion a year at least. And I see a Russia that is dangerous and malevolent, but I also see a Russia that is weak and is struggling in Ukraine. So that's where I put the readiness story. And the crucial thing is, are we deterring Russia, and can we face down the threats of Russia? And the answer is absolutely. And that's where our armed forces are now. And the one that I should mention, which is on a par with the Army in terms of the need for additional investment, are those things that we call the enablers. So logistics, medical, our comms, our cyber, those need more investment as well.
Isn't there an issue, though, about our resilience and being able to backfill in terms of losses in any conflict? Isn't there a real concern around that at the moment?
I genuinely don't tend to subscribe to that anxiety because we are so extraordinarily strong compared to our principal threat, Russia. And the question which is difficult to answer in public, but that you should be asking people like me, is if we were to get into a war with Russia, how quickly could we get control of the air? Because if you have sufficient control of the air, then your ability to put at risk a nation, and especially a nation's economy, is very, very strong. How quickly can we have control of the sea? And again, that ability to have control of the sea for NATO is phenomenal. And then the land forces, the piece that has changed in the last few years in terms of NATO and a stronger NATO that has got clearer plans, is no longer a NATO that thinks if Russia was to invade and to gain a piece of territory, how do we then fight to get that territory back? It's a NATO that sees the risk of territory being invaded and how quickly can it get its land forces in there to block any risk of aggression and territory being grabbed. And again, I feel incredibly confident that that's what NATO's got, and that's how NATO can keep its citizens safe. So the risk with the thinking of if you go to war with Russia, right, you're then in a long war, and that actually you're now going to have this protracted war and you're going to need the relief for casualties in the way that Ukraine has suffered, that is not how we would fight. And we need to be really confident of our phenomenal overmatch, and it's the overmatch that deters Russia. And I have never been clearer than any time in my career about the success that NATO is having in deterring Russia. Russia does not want to fight with NATO, and Russia does not want a nuclear war. And we should be really confident of that. We've got a dangerous, malevolent Russia, and we need to maintain that advantage. And the best way of maintaining that advantage is for all of us to get a bit stronger.
So if the USA withdrew either entirely or in part their contribution to NATO or their presence here in Europe, is Europe still strong enough to match Russia?
So I think Europe is strong enough
Yeah.
because of its strategic depth. So 500 million people, incredible economies, but I reject the premise. I've been alongside the Defence Secretary in those initial meetings with SecDev from America, and we have been fortunate to have the clarity from America that America is sticking with NATO. America has just agreed, it's just agreed at the NATO level its next candidate to be secure. It then has to go through the American political process. But that should give you reassurance that America's continuing its role with the alliance. And then the other piece of the American conversation is a frankness. And the frankness is America is going to continue to provide all of us in Europe with the nuclear security guarantee. But it's also saying it's got other priorities, its homeland security and the challenges in the Indo-Pacific. And Europe, you're going to have to do more for the security of Europe, and we no longer have that guarantee in terms of conventional American help for the security of Europe. That is a significant change, and that's why you're seeing Europe responding.
Just one final quick question. We've had difficulty at this committee getting information out of the MOD in terms of readiness, and the SDR proposes a defence readiness bill. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think we should have a very honest conversation with this committee about our readiness levels, and that needs to be done in camera, because I think that's sensitive information, and you should know how many days' notice have we got our various force elements, and how long can we support them for, and what are those ammunition levels, and what is our resilience, and so on. That should be I think we've got a Defence Secretary he's very comfortable with that conversation. I think having a readiness bill that highlights the importance of that clarity and the respect to Parliament is a mechanism that reinforces that. So I don't have any problems with that.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's now move on to defence reform. If I can bring in Mike Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Admiral, for your time. The current government is instituting a period of defence reform. It's a significant rewiring of the Ministry of Defence. Could you just, as a brief introduction, just take us through the problems with the old structure and how this new structure is going to solve those problems?
Yes. So I think we all know that trying to have clear accountability in the Ministry of Defence has been difficult. Everybody's got a vote, but nobody's quite responsible enough. So I think that's been a problem. I think we've got problems with layers and layers of process and hierarchy, and I think that's going to be difficult to get rid of.
Why?
Why? Because I think we struggle to get rid of it. We you know, even with reform programs. I'll come to that. And then I also think that when you're in the era of the peace dividend, and that's why I think it's so important. The peace dividend has ended. We're in a different era. When people walk through those tiger traps in the Ministry of Defence, we should all have to the forefront of our mind, how do we make our country safer today, and how do we make it even stronger with our influence abroad? I think when you're in the middle of a peace dividend, I query whether the tone of people walking through those tiger traps has been too much about how do I make sure that we come in on budget by the end of the year. And that's the rationale, that's the shift, that if you want to go to a focus on warfighting readiness, you need to have that clarity that when you walk through those tiger traps, it's all about getting our nation even safer. And then you've got a programme that says, right, the Permanent Secretary continues to be the accounting officer, he's got the Department of State, but can we stop a Department of State dabbling in the small stuff? And can you make it a bit more muscular in Whitehall to have the big policy conversations, especially with the Treasury and with the Foreign Office? I think we all welcome that. You then have the nuclear area, which has gone through lots of reforms. So let's stick with the leadership there. Let's stick with how we've created the defence nuclear enterprise. That is a massive area for us to get stronger in. And we've started that programme and leave that well alone to a certain extent. And then you get to the military strategic headquarters and to the National Armaments Director. The biggest piece of reform is the National Armaments Director, and I welcome that. And that is about recognising that frequently when we have been debating about investing in a particular capability, we have actually been having conversations about that individual programme. And we don't look at it through a domain lens. We don't look at it through a big industry lens. We haven't been looking at it through exports. And again, it's trying to say, can we lift that up? We also want to create a National Armaments Director that is free to not be chasing 1,000 user requirements in order to produce the thing that we imagine that we want, that might not even exist. So can we as chiefs describe the problem that we want to get after and give the National Armaments Director the freedom to see what's out there in the market, what might be spawned by that problem, and where does our industry and innovation come up with better solutions? And can the National Armaments Director, when he or she comes back to the chiefs, say, the good news is there's something out there, the bad news is you can't afford it, but I've got something that you can afford, which is 80% of what you might have had in mind, and you can have it twice as fast. And can we have grown-up conversations that if we're going to support it properly, we're going to deal with the resilience, we're going to deal with the infrastructure, we're going to ensure that we've got the people. We have been doing too many things piecemeal rather than taking bigger looks. And then for the military strategic headquarters, that's about giving additional influence to the Chief of Defence Staff with the Chiefs Committee. And if we want to have an integrated force, so we want to embrace maritime, air, land with space and cyber, and ensure that they can all fight together in a much stronger way than we currently do, you can't have a system where you don't have a controlling mind in the CDS, but you have a chief's table where they're all in competition and fighting for resources and fighting for. And so what we've got now is you've got much more authority as the Chief of Defence Staff. You then embrace your Chiefs Committee, and we have those difficult conversations, and we lock shields around. The priority has got to be that we've got to get more lethal, we've got to invest more in the army, and that might mean that we accept that it's going to be a slower investment programme over here.
So it sounds great, and it also sounds like many good ideas obvious. Like the idea of having the Chief of the Defence Staff commanding the other chiefs is obvious. The idea of having a National Armaments Director is obvious. So why wasn't it done before?
I think, in the same way that it may not be surprising that there might be a better way of running things, I think it's also not surprising that large bureaucracies very rarely make substantial changes, and they rarely volunteer to engineer those changes. Because I think that's the way that bureaucracies behave, and I think I welcome, and
And so, if I may, sorry, then
Yeah.
why will this time be different?
So you're absolutely right. So the thing that's different, and this has been a frustration for me, because I don't think we've made as much progress as we should have in terms of reforming and taking some of the opportunities that are out there. So when we've had a series of, particularly in terms of head office, we've had a series of change programs that have made very little progress. Defence design, head office reform, some things in terms of our ops commitment area, and the resistance to change has won out. And we've gone to a very different method with the current reform programme, which is it is top-down led. And that is very strong leadership from the Defence Secretary. It hasn't been the usual debate of can we have 20 different ideas about what might be the best model. It's like this is going to be the model with these 4 big players. Then it is right. We're going to bring some people in and we're going to organise around those 4 players, and we're going to design it that way. And then we're going to demand changes. That is very, very different to the way that we've been doing in the last few years. I would argue that I did something similar when I was first Sea Lord. So it wasn't a consensual, how might we change? It was leadership saying, we are going to change and this is what it's going to look like. And in bureaucracies, I think you need that even more so than compared to other large organisations.
Thank you. And if we look at the UK military and compare it to other militaries, we have a very high ratio of admirals, air marshals and generals as compared to the number of personnel across our militaries. Seems to me there is an argument, as you know, we're talking about reform and radical thinking, there is an argument for reducing those number of starred officers, bringing it more in line with, I don't know, the US Marine Corps or the Israeli Defence Force. There are lots of other small military forces that have much better ratios. Could you explain to me why that hasn't been considered as part of this defence reform?
So I think it is part of the defence reform. So I think it will be considered. I think the difference when you have the US Marine Corps example or whatever is it's a single entity.
Well, it's integrated.
It's definitely integrated.
We're sort of going in that direction, aren't we?
It's definitely integrated, and it's definitely lethal. And there are a lot of things to admire about it. The big difference, is that when you step back, the US Marine Corps is not the National Armed Forces of America. And so the examples, I'm obviously more familiar with the Navy. So in the Navy itself is probably about 10 or 11 admirals.
How many?
In the Navy, in the Navy completely, no, in the United States, miles more. In the Navy completely, it's over 30 admirals. Now the reason is because you've got other responsibilities within NATO, where you're national representatives. You've got other roles within the Ministry of Defence. You've got other roles in terms of head office and that. You've got other roles as part of your joint command, strategic command, and so on. So those do soak up additional positions. And some of that, we just have to look at carefully. I talk about the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force costs about 8 to 9 billion a year to run, and every year we generate over £6 billion of aeronautical exports. The US Marine Corps doesn't do anything like that, and it doesn't have those kind of ratios. So we should definitely look at everything.
Yeah.
But you are comparing apples and oranges.
It's not just as my last question, Chair. It's not just a cost issue, because the salary of an Admiral or an Air Marshal is nothing as compared to an F-35. But there is that idea, isn't there, that when you have a very busy field at the top of an organisation, they've all got staff and departments, and that actually slows down the ability of that organisation to make fast decisions. And one of the things that has been outlined is that the number of civil servants is going to be cut. So the staffing at the MOD, where many of these staff officers sit, is going to be cut. And it's interesting, you have said that we are going to be looking at that. Do you think we are going to see commensurate cuts to starred officers as we do to the civil service, sort of on a comparison basis?
So potentially, but I definitely think. So I don't think any of us have a difficulty with what you're proposing. I think it's absolutely what we're doing and what we're looking to do. I think the other piece that goes with it, particularly on the military side, which again is part of the defence review, is we need fewer people that are back office or not doing military tasks, and get them back into a core military function. And then to your other point, that it's not just military and or civilian, it's both. We need to give more authority to our people at a junior level. So whether you're an assistant head civil servant, or whether you're a colonel or lieutenant colonel or equivalent military, the level of frustration that those people have dealing with these series of layers that don't necessarily add value to the beauty that starts off with the staff officer, and the time that it takes, we've got to get over that. So that's part of some of the reforms. Some of that might be different ways of working. Some of it might be right. Let's remove the layers. And I did that in Navy Command, and it's much harder doing that in London.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Thank you very much. Lincoln Job, please.
Just on the military strategic headquarters, Admiral, is it going to be still in the MOD? I mean, is that
Yes.
Yeah. So, if I've understood this, and therefore, will you sort of, if I could summarise what I think it means, is people are going to get into and stay in their lane a lot more. The military is going to do military stuff. The Department of State is going to do its policy stuff. Is that a fair way of putting it?
It is, but I make a distinction as well in terms of where are you on that scale. So for me, the Department of State will be doing what I call big P policy. What is our approach to the Gulf? And then translating the political intent into policy language, policy and outcomes, and in effect guardrails outcomes and guardrails for the military strategic headquarters to then achieve those outcomes. And that the issue will be, can we get that clarity, or do we continue doing this fudging where we're all doing the same and there's too much duplication and so on? So can you stick at big P and not come down to this level? Can you have real clarity on your outcomes, and then we deliver on them? And I think that I welcome that, but I think I don't want to pretend that the beast that is the Ministry of Defence and the muscle memory is going to have to be adjusted and changed. And back to the previous questions, sometimes the way to accelerate or make sure that adjustment happens is that you force change on an organisation, you change the leadership, you change the way that it's been operated, and you force it to happen. My worry is that if the reform isn't strong enough or fast enough or deep enough, then it will tend to reverse back to its comfort, and we'll continue with too much duplication, too much process, too much hierarchy, and there's a real challenge there.
Just on the model that you've got now with CDS actually legally in command of the other three, obviously running alongside the three service pillars, you've got the joint staff.
Yeah.
And I remember 20 years ago there was a big push to make the younger generation more joint in order to better to support the integrated force. Is that still the sort of direction of travel, or is it avowedly single service till you get to 4-star and then you show potential for jointery and can become the CDS?
So I think we're way past that. I think we're. I think for all of us now we're joint. I think my generation. I did the third. I'm so old. I did the third Advanced Command and Staff course where we all came together at it was Bracknell then Trivenham. So I describe my generation as being joint and being comfortable, even as a naval officer, with being able to employ and direct tactical activity in air and land. The bit that I think is different for the coming generation that are on staff course now is that they have to be the generation that instead of being joint, they have to be, in simple speak, they have to be able to be an integrated commander. And can they employ space and cyber in a tactical effect way, which somebody of my generation and training, I might be guilty of being slightly in the bluffer's space of how I am tactically employing space and cyber, whereas I'd expect somebody going through staff course now to be much more proficient at being able to do that, and it becomes an integral part of their career as they're going through. And that's what I think is the change. And I think that's happening with other nations. I think we are leading on some of the clarity with that. And I think we've also got organisations that are comfortable with that direction. So you've got your strengthening of cyber command as part of the defence review within strategic command. And we've already created space command, but they need to be even stronger.
Just for the record, you're not ancient at all, CDS, because I was on ACSC 4. So, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Admiral, we've spoken for some time about defence reform. That's underway with the Military Strategic Headquarters, new National Armaments Director. I'm going to ask you how that's going to change things for the actual fighting force as opposed to within the MOD. And the context for that is that we still have people training how to do weighted marches and marksmanship on a 300-metre range, when you know, and we all know, that is not current warfare, it's certainly not future warfare, and we're talking about deterrence and credibility. So how is defence reform at the top going to actually bring some modernisation to our fighting force?
So thank you. So you're right. Some of those things have to change. Some of them, I think, we and your background, you know better than I, that some of the core aspects about how you test individuals and ensure that they have the character and the determination to be able to do a whole range of things. I think those aspects endure. What I would say is that all of the services are changing, and I've got a letter here, and I will share it with the committee in terms of from the Commander Field Army.
Yes, please.
But just to give you an example, the Army, as part of the Army's drive to modernise, they've trained over 2,000 UAS pilots, so drone pilots, through the land training scheme, and 350 first-person view pilots by earlier this year. We've introduced a much tougher regime in terms of the electronic signature, which we know is such a difficulty in that fight with Ukraine and Russia. So introduce that on exercise. There's a task force Hannibal, which is a much tougher OPT4, which is trying to get after a less scripted version of how we do exercises. So that's happening at the tactical level, and that's happening across all three services. At the higher level, the example I would give, and the reason why people like me are much more confident that we can do things differently and we have the opportunity for change in a stronger way than we've had in the past, is Task Force Kindred and what we've been doing with Ukraine. And I think we have always been able to do an urgent operational requirement and choose one specific thing and get it through the system really quickly. And we kind of feel really proud about ourselves and we pat ourselves on the back. The thing that is different about Kindred is that we are spending billions of pounds on hundreds of lines. I think it's nearly 1,000 programme lines. And we are doing it at a speed that we have never been able to do at that scale in the past.
Okay.
And that gets to what I think is your core point, that the warfighter gets the kit that they need in a much quicker way. And when you say, how are we doing that? Andy Start, the interim NAD and boss of DNS, will say, it's things like we've got 11, under our old system, we've got 11 people checking for the contract to go through and all the rest of it. We've got rid of 10 of them and we rely on one person. And there are other aspects that the Chancellor announced in her spring statement. Those big capability items, we've got to get them on contract inside 2 years. The medium capability, in terms of cost items, it's got to be within a year. And then everything else has got to be inside 3 months. I can't tell you how much I welcome that. And that, again, is the top-down piece, because that forces the system to adjust. And the reason why that's necessary is because we have got some horrendous figures, because even to just do a business case for our Cat A and Cat B programs, it takes us between 1,000 and 1,200 days. So 1,000 days before you even have a contract to buy the thing, before you bring it in, before you take it into surface, and it's years away before it gets to that individual that needs it on the front line. These are massive changes. They can be done. They're top down, and they're going to have to be driven all the way through.
Okay, thank you. And I think you're right to highlight Kindred, and I think you and all your staff should be very proud of what Kindred's achieved, but also acknowledge that Kindred's been a mechanism to arm the warfighter, the Ukrainian warfighter, which is good, but doesn't answer my question respectfully, which was about why our people are not being trained in this. And you mentioned the FPV, let's call it a trial training program, because that's not a capability we have in our force. It's a training purely for the sake of the training. Those people who have done that course aren't able to deploy with it because we don't own that capability. I think we have to acknowledge that.
So by the way, I agree with that, and I think that's very fair.
So if I may have another question. You mentioned earlier in this committee hearing that reflecting previous change programs in the MOD, that you found that resistance to change had won out. That speaks to a culture of resistance to change. Looking back now at your time in the military, why do you think there is this cultural inability or resistance to modernise that goes potentially from the top right down to the section in a platoon of infantry people?
Thank you. So there'll be other people that have written PhDs and theses on this and so on. So I think some of it, I think, is in the way that we have been training and in the military psyche, that extraordinary responsibility where you are risking people's lives, I think, does impose a caution. And therefore, the way that you take your orders, this is how you're going to use this piece of kit. This is how you're going to act as the section commander. These are your tactics and procedures. I think it's been very, very strong for very good reason. I think when you're at peace, that gets reinforced, and there isn't an incentive to change. You actually get promoted by being very good at following those TTPs and being a decent leader and so on. I think what we've learned, and I think that goes all the way through the system, all the way through to senior officers as well. I think what you're seeing with Ukraine is when you are in an existential fight, then you absolutely change, and you change your whole culture, you change the way that you're fighting. Ukraine doesn't have the mass that Russia has, therefore it's got to come up with different ways that it's going to keep those Russian hordes at bay. And the way that Ukraine is doing it is through fundamentally their guts and courage and ingenuity, and they have spawned that they are ahead when it comes to drone warfare. They are leading the world in drone warfare. That happens when you're in an existential fight. We have got to get closer to that mentality, because we can definitely do it. And you've seen that with Kindred and how we've been able to support Ukraine. We've got to get closer to that edge and have that edge in peacetime. And we've got to be more sceptical and questioning about doing things the way that we've always done them. And I think that's a problem for all peacetime militaries. And because we've been so close to the Ukraine fight, that's why we've got an added advantage to up our game.
Thank you. Just Admiral, with regards to the National Armaments Director, it's my understanding that the individual would be getting, including bonuses, a salary of £640,000. Now that would be double what the Prime Minister is getting, way more than many of our brave servicemen and women. Do you think that is right? Do you think that situation is tenable?
So it's not directly in my lane, but I'm really selfish when it comes to the National Armaments Director. And if the National Armaments Director improves the system so that we get the kit faster and ideally to a better price and ideally to higher quality, with the amount of money that we're spending, that the difference that the right person might be able to make, I don't think we should fixate on their precise salary. We should fixate on them improving so that we get a much better system, you get much better value for the taxpayer, and we get much better service to the warfighter. So I wouldn't mind if they're paid, whether it's 300,000 or 600,000 or £1 million. I want to be really selfish that they deliver, because it can be so much better than it currently is.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I don't think anybody would argue about value for money. It's just whether the taxpayer is getting value for money at 640,000. But no doubt that's something else that we will be looking into later on. Michelle Scroggin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Previous reviews have talked about transformation and used the same sort of language. Why do you feel they've found it so difficult to achieve?
Because I think it's some of the earlier answers. I think it's. And by the way, I think you should be very questioning about whether or not we can achieve it this time. I think we need the pressure to force us to change. I think that what's different with this one is a review that has been complementary in terms of the submissions that the service chiefs put in and what they've got back. There hasn't been a clash with. You've got service chiefs that are desperate to move their services on and to modernise and to embrace technology and to be a bit bolder. And I've been fortunate to serve alongside them. And then the other piece that I think is different is this top-down approach. And that feels very, very different. And I think there are times where you can have a much more consensual approach, and you definitely need to bring the people with you and so on. But I would be an advocate that if you're going to do large change in big bureaucracies, then you need people to stay there for longer, and you need to be really clear that you're going to focus this from the very top, and then you drive the people at the top and again force them to push this change through. And we're starting it. We haven't done it. That's why we're still going to have to push this through. But that's why I've got much more confidence in this. And then I think the other aspects is that the clarity that we've got with some of the opportunities that we've learned from Ukraine help us. And then I also think the geopolitical backdrop that we need to do this and we need to get stronger, again, provides more emphasis as to why we need to get on with it.
Do you believe, or should we believe, that it's possible to achieve it this time round? What do you think are the biggest stumbling blocks that we would come up against?
It's definitely achievable. The stumbling blocks will be some of the bureaucratic politicking. My area doesn't need to change, but everybody else's area needs to change. And then some of the more fundamental ones will be the relationship with the Cabinet Office and with the Treasury. When I go back to Kindred spends about 3 billion a year. It's quite light touch by me and the Permanent Secretary, and it's effectively run by a 1-star civil servant in main building. And then we have a 2-star who is pulling together all of the contracts in Abbey Wood. That system is working because I'm able to take more operational risk because there's a war on, and therefore we push things through more quickly to our Ukrainian friends. And because there's a war on, then we're also prepared to take more financial risk. And that is an antithesis to the way that we normally behave. We normally are a bit stressed on the money side, so we then impose more control. You put more control on, it goes slower, and you haven't got a hope of getting to the advantages that you're trying to get after. So I think it's whether or not we can make those adjustments, and that's why I welcome the contracts. It's a big contract, but you've got to get on contract in 2 years. Or if it's a medium-sized contract, it's got to be 1 year. And stop the debate as to, right now, adjust all your systems to ensure that can happen. That feels very, very different.
We had a review recently in my patch where we brought defence together, and one of the biggest sticking points was the fact that the SMEs couldn't get into the MOD.
Yes.
So that kind of, what you're saying is reduce the bureaucracy and it will work better.
Absolutely, and do things that other industry does. So Kindred, we've got some examples with Kindred. I've got to be careful as to what examples I give. That's the only reason I'm thinking. So we might want a long-range drone, or we might want a very long-range powerful drone which might be closer to a cruise missile. In the past, we would go to the big primes with our, here's 100 user requirements and so on. Some of the techniques that we've been using are, can we keep that very vague? Can we push that out to a whole series of people? And can we say, you've got to come back inside 6 weeks, and you've got to have a concept of operations that we're satisfied with, and 6 weeks later, you've got to be able to fly it and prove it. What was really interesting is when we started those techniques, some of the really large primes came back to us and said, sorry, is there a typo here? We can provide you a ConOps in 6 months, and so on. They have changed as well. So that's part of my confidence that we can do this, and we can do it very, very differently.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to now people, recruitment and retention, and to delve into that, Lincoln Job.
We've done the people one.
I think I'm following Michelle, Jim.
We're going on to people, recruitment and retention. Right, let's go. If not Lincoln, then Mike Martin, please.
So just dealing with this personnel issue, as I understand it, obviously all three services were shrinking in size, and as I understand it, the Navy and the RAF now are sort of have they just started to
net positive now.
Yeah, net positive. Okay, but still below the trend line that you'd like to fulfil the whole. And then the army is still shrinking in size. Could you just comment on some of the challenges that still remain? I mean, the army's been shrinking in size for some time now.
Yes. So it's both recruitment not being as strong as we would like it, and retention being worse than we would like it. So if you go to the retention piece, some of that is the bureaucracy and process and treat our people better and trust them more, strong in the defence review. So you're an incredible person in the army, you're a section leader, you're a sergeant, you literally put your life on the line, you look after your team, your family and friends, bear that commitment, and that's what you do for your country. You come back from operations, you want to hire a car, and we treat you like you're a potential fraudster, and we want the reassurance of a 1-star sign-off before you take a car on company business to go to Abbey Wood. There are things that we are getting wrong with how we treat our people and how we look.
Changing that example.
So those things are changing.
Yeah.
So I just give it as an example of that's where we've got to change the culture. If I then look after our people better. So some of the things that we're doing, and what I think is one of the most significant, is buying back our homes. So the 36,000 homes under Annington is a massive win, because we're now the landlord. We're not paying those hundreds of millions a year to the landlord. We can use that to invest. We can actually say, this service families accommodation, some of them have got large gardens and so on. Well, actually, in a modern way of living, you might sell off some of them and build, sell off half the patch and get a receipt, and on the other half, build some modern homes really quickly. And so can we get after some of those things? And the $1.5 billion extra in the defence review, as part of that programme, which is then $7 billion, helps us. So that's good. If I go to the recruiting, the frustration is not that we have a country that doesn't want to serve in the armed forces. We've got a mixture of, I think it's sort of 16 people applying for every place in the Air Force, about 12 to 10 people for every place in the Army, and about 7 to 10 for every place in the Navy. We have not been good enough at converting those people that are interested in joining the armed forces and making them recruits. And some of that is we're just behind the times. So young people that expect a response and they expect engagement, they don't expect, can you fill in the most difficult computer system ever? The medical issues, we take too long, and we lose too many people. So we're changing. So some of that was. We have had medical rules that assume that everybody might serve for a full career of 22 years, even though we know on average for most people it's between 7 and 12 years. So why not have a system? Are you going to be fit enough for the next 5 years? And if you're going to serve for a further 5 years, we'll do a medical again. I mean, they sound really obvious, but those are the things that we're introducing. And those are things that we need to get after. When I was head of the Navy, I tried to join the Navy, and it was shockingly difficult. I could not believe it. And I paid one of my son's friends to try and join as a chef, to do a sort of secret shopper.
Which is a pinch point trade.
Yeah, which is a pinch point trade, in order to understand how ridiculous were some of the systems and how we were treating that individual. It's leadership. It's not having people. One of the other things that we've done is there's a very good reason why you might get promoted, but you might not be the best person to be in charge of our recruiting or involved in recruiting. And can we look at the individuals that are doing this so that we get after the best people for recruiting, not the most deserving person to be promoted? And it's really basic stuff like that. And the good news is that we've turned it around in the Navy and the Air Force. It's so much better in the Army than it was 12 months ago, and we have to keep improving. And we had Chiefs Committee today. The Army are not comfortable with the pace of change. They're going to introduce a whole bunch of new initiatives because they have to get after this in the next couple of years in order to meet some of our big NATO commitments in the next couple of years. So that's at the Chiefs level, and it's our responsibility, and we need to get after it. And it, we can do it, but it needs to be much stronger than it has been.
Thank you. If I can bring in Jesse Norman here, please.
Thank you very much, Steve. Sir Tony, you've been admirably clear in your remarks today. Thank you. Whether it's on the importance of better reporting on readiness, or the struggle with dealing with process and hierarchy in the MOD, or the difficulty of making any progress with change programs, or the need for less back office, or the 11 people checking a contract for Kindred and 1,000 days to get a medium level contract through. So in that spirit, can I just ask you about the timing of some of the spending announcements we've had? So, I mean, if you talk to people at there is no one at your level, but at senior levels in the armed forces, one of the worries is that no new money is going to start flowing until after the Defence Industrial Review in the wider ecosystem. Is that a proper worry? That would be could be up to 18 months after the government's taken office in the face of a war in Europe. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think it's a worry. So your point about, I think it's completely understandable. New government comes in, it wants to take stock, it wants a defence review, it wants to set its strategy for the whole of the Parliament and beyond. I don't think that we're going to be waiting until the defence industrial strategy in order to lay those contracts. That's why it feels very, very, very different, and that's why for lots of us there's a sense of relief that the defence review is out there. We've had all the conversations with the Treasury. We'll get our spending review detailed tomorrow. My job and the job of the chiefs is get on and deliver against the SDR. That's where we are. It's implement the SDR.
So the so-called demand signal is coming now, therefore, and will not wait for the Defence Industrial Review.
No, I think that will be complementary to it, and I think the piece of departmental mechanics will be the Defence Investment Plan. But we're in a different position to where we were 10 days ago by having got the review out. Yep. And therefore we can get on with some things that were being held up. So I can reassure you that we don't have to wait for all of these other things. We can get on with much more now. Some of them will have to be meshed with Defence Industrial Strategy, Defence Investment Plan, but it feels completely different to where we were 10 days ago.
Mark Rutte, who Secretary General of NATO, said on Monday that if we didn't spend 5%, we'd better learn to speak Russian. Is that a view you agree with?
I'm so tempted to say niet.
Yeah, but what would the sentence to follow be, Sir Tony?
So I think the other piece that the SecGen talked about was the reassurance that we should have about how strong NATO is. And
right, just to be clear, you don't agree with him. He's wrong about that.
So I think
it wasn't right to think that if we don't spend that 5%, we face a very serious threat of a potential.
I think we all accept that we're in this era change. The piece that I think is so true and consistent for the UK and where we are is this security construct, which is extraordinary and we should celebrate. So we're a nuclear power. We're in the world's largest and most powerful military alliance, and we have as our principal ally the world's most powerful country on the planet. That's what keeps us safe, and that's what we need to bind to. That's what we're doing, and that's what we need to strengthen so that we don't have the concerns that we're all going to be speaking Russian. And then I'm not going to get into a day ahead of the spending review and 2 weeks out from a NATO summit. I don't. That is for the government to decide precisely what ought to be the spending level, and I give privately the advice about what is the risk that we're taking at different spending levels.
Okay, right, but I mean, you would agree, we've got a war in Ukraine, which we are doing everything we can to support the Ukrainians in. We know that Xi Jinping has instructed the People's Liberation Army to set a 2027 deadline for invading Taiwan. So what difference is this SDR going to make to our lethality and our ability to make a difference within the next 2 years, which is the timetable of planning that implies?
So the problem with that question is you skip over what we've already got. So what we've...
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm asking what the increment is. And I want a specific reason why. I'll come to that in a second. But what is the increment, first of all? What more does this give us that we didn't have, that we won't have had two weeks ago?
So for the committee, I mean, the increments through the 2020s are modest. The defence review reinforces some of those core concepts. We're a nuclear power and we're investing in nuclear. We know that we need to strengthen our army. We know that we've got these big programs called AUKUS and GCAP. And we know that we need to embrace technology and our resilience in a stronger way than we have been. Hence those ammunition factories, hence some of those new cruise missiles, some of the drones, some of the autonomy. That will flow in the next few years. I'm not going to pretend to the committee that there is going to be a vast change in the next 2 years. But what I can tell you is the substance of what keeps us safe and why you should be assured of our safety and our ability to act around the world is with the armed forces that you've got and how we operate.
Isn't there a slight bait and switch, Sir Tony? Because when you ask what's different about the spending review, the response will be, as you have emphasised in your testimony today, a response about capital investment. So you talk about AUKUS, you talk about subs, you talk about GCAP. But actually the problem which is going to affect lethality in the short run is it's a current spending problem, not a capital problem. If you think about the things that are going to make a difference, they're going to be things like drones and AI and things that require and acquisition of specialist skills and technologies. Those things are going to be desperately needed in the short run, and you've already suggested to us that there's going to be relatively little change in terms of the funding that will go for those.
So I think where I do disagree with you is your assumption that we're in deficit now. We are extraordinarily strong. Nuclear power in the world's strongest military alliance, and with America as our principal ally. There are more dangerous threats out there, and we have to get stronger in order to maintain the overmatch and to even increase the overmatch. This is not that we're in a deficit and we're trying to play catch up. So the strength of alliances, the strength of the strategic depth that you get from these gigantic economies. NATO's got 1 billion people in it. NATO's got 3.5 million people in uniform. Russia is struggling in Ukraine. The difficulty for China to do a military seizure of Taiwan is enormous. Yet that's why I'm slightly more cautious about a date that a leader comes out with when he wants his armed forces to be ready for something doesn't necessarily mean that his armed forces will be ready or that he's actually going to act on it. And we can do things to try to maintain that stability and to try and head off what would be very bad decisions.
Okay, thank you. I think final question. 2 key areas which do require current spend as opposed to capital spend are acquisition of interim technologies and training and recruitment. If you were writing the SDR yourself now, is there more investment out of current spending that you would have made in those areas? Because they feel quite light, and you've kind of suggested that they are quite light given the relatively shallow impact of current spending over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of the rest of the decade?
Yeah, so I'm not. I'm less worried about training and recruitment in terms of investment. I think we've got the people. We've got that's more on us. Doesn't necessarily require investment. The bits, if you ask me, where would I want to thicken? It would be the areas that you're. So, anything AI, anything autonomy, far more drones, and it would be as well as those ammunition factories, because I welcome the additional resilience that comes from that. I'd also want to deepen my stockpiles whilst those factories are being built. To your capital, that to me is a better capital example. We're doing the right thing and investing in those capital, in capital terms, but in operating cost terms, I'd like to buy more ammunition at the same time. We can't do everything. The government's being honest about the choices it's taking, and that's why you're seeing this as being something that goes through the 2020s and into the 2030s.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lincoln Job.
Just a tiny one. If we're not in deficit, and I get the impression you're talking about in strategic terms, but if I were to ask you how many working tanks have we got, obviously you're not going to know that figure off the top of your head, but one of your brilliant team will pass you a note in a minute. I'd be fascinated to hear the answer to that question in terms of backing up or otherwise your statement that we're not currently today in deficit.
Yeah, but I suppose my caution with that is that if we're charged with the nation's security and safety, it may be that whether or not we've got 50 tanks or 100 tanks is not necessarily going to be the defining factor as to whether or not the country remains safe or not. That's to me is the problem with those questions. I come back to, is our readiness at a level that we are playing our part with our NATO partners, and is it achieving deterrence with Russia? And are we really confident about that? And the problem I think with the micro example is it skips over what is fundamentally our security construct, and that we are a beneficiary of a collective group where nations are, in Europe might be, never mind our 50 tanks or never mind our modest increase in the army, they are increasing their armies by tens of thousands and they're increasing their tanks by hundreds. We're playing our part, and it might be in another part of the forest, it might be nuclear, it might be our anti-submarine warfare, it might be our 5th and 6th generation jets, and it might be an army that is embracing the drone technology faster than any other. And I think it's got to be that compendium if we're then going to link that micro point to are we safe and are we deterring Russia and are we getting it right?
Thank you very much. Michelle Scroggum.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on to people again. The committee continues to get really concerning reports about bullying and harassment, particularly for minority groups and for women. What's been done in your time to try and put that right? And where do you see that changing, and what do you think's gone wrong?
So I think it is changing, but it's changing too slowly. I think you've always had senior leaders that have wanted to get after this, but I think you've got a bunch of senior leaders that are really clear that we need to do more, particularly in terms of the bullying, the harassment, but some of the gender issues, some of the culture issues, some of the racism issues that come up. In terms of what's changed, I think we've got much stronger in terms of our visibility about this is wrong. I think we've made a massive effort to call out and to encourage people to have more confidence in the system that they need to call it out. That's where you then get the zero tolerance for inappropriate behaviour. That's happened. You've also got, if there was an anxiety that if you called this out and it was in your chain of command, then do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel that you'll be disadvantaged? So right, take it out of the chain of command. Can we have things like the Defence Crime, Serious Crimes Unit, which is completely separate? That feels like a much better way to approach it. Our service networks are much stronger, and I think we're having clearer conversations where and I think they're very balanced, and where they commend us where we're getting some things right, but I think they're really honest where they say it's too slow and so on. And the difficulty for us as senior leaders is those ugly stories. They are going to become more visible as we get more people coming forward and formalising their complaints, and then we've got to get after it. And I think this is going to be tough, and I think this is going to go on for some time, and that is how we're going to make the improvements. And I've in my time we've tried different techniques, we've looked at different organisations. It's hard. We're really clear that it's unacceptable and we have to get after it, and we've got to do better. And we are improving, but it's not fast enough. And hence why we've got to keep reviewing it, improving it, in order to ensure that our people are kept safe and they can have a flourishing career without all this nonsense going on.
I met recently with Jaisley Beck's mum, and I don't think she has any confidence that this is changing, if at all, changing quick enough. What would you say to her, faced with that? What would you do in her position to make this happen quicker and make sure that that people coming into this service are protected, and that they feel as safe in these services as they would in civilian life?
So the first thing is that I would reinforce the apology that we've given to Gunnar Beck's mum. I'd be brutally honest, not only about the inquiry and the appalling things that happened to her, and the way that we let her down and her daughter down. I think it's shocking. I'd be brutally honest about the 700 or so comments on Facebook where predominantly women came forward saying, it's not just Gunnar Beck, it's me. And we have got to respond to that. I would then say that these are the things that we've done, these are the things that we're doing. We are being as open as we can be as to how we get after this. There's not a hint of sweeping stuff under the carpet. We're doing the opposite. We're trying to break it front and centre so we can learn from it and stop these things happening again. And that feels like the right approach. And then I would also offer some reassurance. And I don't think it'd be appropriate for Gunnar Beck's mum, because I think I imagine it's just too difficult for her. But for you, I would say the other side is, when we ask women, would you recommend a career in the armed forces for your friends and family and so on, 85 to 90% of women say absolutely. So that's the dilemma. There's lots of things that we're getting right. There are some shocking things that we're getting wrong, and we've got to get after them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Admiral, can I pass on my best wishes and the thanks of my community in Aldershot and Farnborough for your service. It won't surprise you to know that I'm going to ask about Homeland resilience efforts, given I have Home Command based in my constituency. So how does the Strategic Defence Review reshape Defence's responsibilities for supporting Homeland resilience, particularly in safeguarding critical national infrastructure?
So thank you. So the SDR builds on some things that SJC and Aldershot has been leading on. So we're the beneficiary of of the command in your constituency and the leadership of General Charlie Collins, and you might know, but for the rest of the committee, Op Guardian. So this is, again, if you look in the past, how do we go about some of the homeland resilience? How do we go about some of the protection of the infrastructure? It's all been a bit regional and a bit ad hoc. We've now put that under General Charlie. That's part of Guardian. That then means that the 5,500 civilians, whether you're in the Mod Guard service, the Mod Police, or other civil servants on the security side, all come under the Aldershot Command. We then link that with how we're guarding all of our infrastructure. That's one of the biggest differences that's happened in my time. We then have to respond to some of the additional threats. So whether that's cyber, whether that's the physical threats. Some of that we're already doing with cyber, but it's going to need more investment to protect our systems and to get the assurance we want. On the physical side, there's a whole range of things. So you've got some demands for the Navy, and how do we protect cables, how do we protect our infrastructure? That isn't just right, we need more ships, and we need, some of that is organisation, some of it we're learning from our JEF partners, the Joint Expeditionary Force. The fastest way to check your cables and pipes and so on is to have some protocols, is to involve other nations, and is to do it with private industry, because they've got lots of drones as well, and you can check that way. So you can look after, and you can improve your surveillance to see where you might be vulnerable and what people are up to. So that's some of the maritime piece. The air piece and the physical piece on land, we've got £1 billion to look at an integrated air missile defence system. At one level, the risk is that that's entry money to start that process. I think we've got to be much more demanding to saying, hold on, that's £1 billion. We've seen some of the systems that Ukraine employs. We need to get that on contract quickly, so that should be something that's sorted next year. And then we look at what are the things that we really must protect in a stronger way. So whether that's our largest cities, whether that's some of our major bases, and then how do we blend that with technology? Because actually, technology is showing that you can have counter-drone systems, you can have better surveillance systems. You don't need to have your uber fantastic system that's going to cost you tens of billions. We can improve very, very quickly with the £1 billion that we've got. So and then organisationally, does that all come under SJC as the Homeland Resilience Command? And that's very different to where we were a couple of years ago, both in terms of what we've just done and what we might be able to do in the future.
Right. So what do you see as the principal operational and strategic challenges Defence faces in terms of fulfilling this evolving role, particularly when Defence is often asked to step in at the last resort in times of national emergency?
So I think there's probably lots of different levels. So the UK philosophy, and we've got to stay really close to it, is to deter in the first place. So we've got a fantastic moat around the UK. It's even better if it's the Danube or the Rhine. So defend forward, and that's what we're doing. Keep your deterrence really strong, so that countries know they must not attack us. Then work back so you're protecting ourselves. We are fortunate to have these incredible intelligence agencies. So can we work really, really closely so we see what the threats are? Then can you keep coming back? And the piece that I think is much more demanding is the physical resilience. So is that your integrated air missile defence? Because that feels those are the threats that are becoming prevalent and that we need to respond better to. And then you keep working that back all the way through to, is your organisation able to cope with that? Because in the past it's been a myriad of organisations, and if you were to ask me who's in charge of what, It was hard enough in the Ministry of Defence, but it would be even harder when you look at it cross-government. So that it's not just the Ministry of Defence that is going to have to bend to this. You're seeing that in the Defence Review, and I think you'll see more of that in the National Security Strategy, that improving your resilience is a team effort across the whole of government, and it's all of those layers and all of those spans, and that's what we're doing.
Right. That was the point I was coming on to. Obviously, in the SDR, it refers to the Home Defence Programme, which sits obviously within the Cabinet Office, and says that government must ensure this meets defence's needs. From your perspective, what specific support or coordination does defence require from the Home Defence Programme to deliver on this expanded role effectively, and how confident are you that current governance arrangements can enable that?
So thank you. So I'm confident that we've got the right governance arrangements and they're in place. The piece that needs to follow with that is a much plainer and assertive response. Our security, whether it's health security, and so how do we protect the NHS and ensure that functions? It's our energy security. We saw that with Spain and Portugal. It's much more. It's our democratic security and the risk of disinformation. I think that's the modern challenge. We could make you could give the task to the Ministry of Defence to be Fortress UK, but if our energy supplies can be hit, then we could be severely embarrassed, and that could be hit from either from space and what you can do from space these days, or from cyber and so on. So it's got to be a whole of government effort. We always know that when you say things about joined up government, whole of government, it's easier to say than to do. So again, how do you get after that? And then, but link it to your fundamental core philosophy. And the core philosophy is that we deter others, and be really strong in deterring others, and be prepared to take action so that you don't get attacked. I am wary of where you go in on yourself and you just protect yourself more and more and more, as if somehow it is acceptable to have these threats, and as long as I can defend them, then we're happy. We should be absolutely bothered that somebody wants to attack us, and that they might even dare to do so. And it's got to be forward, and all of this closer to home is the backstop.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much. I believe Lincoln Jock wanted to come in briefly here as well.
Yeah, just on resilience, Admiral, the Health Secretary and the Education Secretary said the other day that they were putting more funds into schools so that the children developed much needed grit. And that's key, clearly, to part of national resilience. What's your experience of, we met the captain of HMS Duncan when we went down to Portsmouth, and he reported to us that he found sailors joining today are more intelligent and more demanding. And I just wondered what your take is on that inherent national resilience and individual resilience of the new generation that are coming through to join the services.
Yes, so thank you. So I don't think it's changed that much from when you and I joined up. I think that individuals are more demanding. I think there is. I think we have got brighter cohorts, but the grit piece, the I don't buy the snowflake generation. One job, because when I look at, whenever it's tested, and whenever you look for people to respond, then and it may be that we're self-selecting, but I see amazing men and women in our armed forces that are committed, and they still have the same camaraderie, and they are still willing to do extraordinary things. And we had, it's horrible, but the way that we were tested in Afghanistan, I can remember going to Sangin, and the idea that you're going on patrol and you put a tourniquet on the top of your leg in case you step on an IED, and it will help to stop you bleeding to death. That's 19, 20-year-olds that do that in the service of their country. And then we've got phenomenal people in special forces that we need to give more assurance to, that we really recognise what they're doing. And then we've got other people all the way through, and those submariners that cut themselves off from society and from their family for months on end, and the commitment that they make and the commitment that their families and friends make is extraordinary. So I think we need to be much clearer about recognising that commitment and less questioning about whether or not these people have got that commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you much. And also Derek Twigg.
CDS, just if you were 5 years hence looking back at this document, which most of us I don't have any real problem with, and everyone thinks it's lots of great ideas and it should be the way we're basically moving forward. In 5 years' time, if certain things in this document hadn't been achieved and delivered, because at the end of the day, you can have as many fine words as you want.
Yes.
It's about delivery. So if some things in this hadn't been delivered, what would most concern you, the top 2 or 3 things that they hadn't been delivered that are in this document?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and difficult question. So some of it is the language of transformation. That's badly needed. Yeah, I agree. But we have got to change our process. We've got to change all of the some of the conversations we've been having. That has got to happen. The other bit that I would stress would be lethality. So the 7,000 cruise missiles, the kill web, the investment in autonomy, just the mindset change that we have got to adjust to a much stronger approach to warfighting readiness, and me being able to assure you that I know people scoff at we're going to have an army that's 10 times more lethal. We are going to have an army that is twice as lethal in 2027 and 3 times as lethal in 2030, because we can do that. And just some of the...
I'm asking you, what if it hadn't been delivered, what would most... What in this document are the 2 or 3 things which you think are absolutely crucial to making a practical difference on the ground?
The 7,000 cruise missiles.
Yeah, get that, yeah.
We've got brilliant people in our armed forces. We're not as lethal as we would want to be. You go up the scale, you get to Storm Shadow and Tomahawk, and then you have a big leap and you get to a nuclear weapon. If you're in a position like me and you're trying to advise the Prime Minister, you want to have as many rungs on the ladder before you have to get to the nuclear sort of rung. And that ability to have at least 7,000 cruise missiles and to be able to launch those, that's on a different scale to what we've currently got now. And those are the types of things that we're looking to do very, very quickly. That to me would be a sort of crystallised example. Some of the other things are much bigger and slightly more enduring.
Thank you very much. Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question about how you see the role of UK defence. We know we're very NATO first. That's been made clear by this government and the SDR. There's a sense within the military, as you well know, that we are overcommitted and that we have tried to do so many things with an ever so far diminishing force that what remains of that force is double or triple committed. That has an effect on personnel, and we've spoken about retention problems because people are burnt out. They come back from one overseas activity and they're quickly required on another because there aren't enough people and we're overcommitted. That's a sense people have. And the committee had conversations at Army HQ which broadly match that without going into detail. Are you able to give us a sense of whether a NATO first focus will mean stopping doing some of the things that we are currently being committed to for the last decade around the world, and could you comment on what they might be?
So I don't think there are many things that we're going to stop doing. To me, some of the adjustments will be that some of those smaller unit level exercises and so on, I think we will try and push those together to be part of NATO, bigger NATO exercises. The Army's been really good at that. Yeah, steadfast start, earlier this year, steadfast defended 16,000 people, and the army lifting up its scale in terms of how it's operating. The bit where I think we can get better is giving people more stability in their lives. That point that you make about you come back from deployment and then suddenly going away again. The piece for me is when we didn't give you notice that you might be going away again, or that we promised you that you come back from deployment and then you'd be around for 4 months and you've recovered. And the way that we risk interfering, and instead of doing the big things and getting that right, and maybe denying some opportunities, but getting a bit of a steadier approach, that feels that we've got to do. And the reason why I'm cautious about this, are we doing too much and so on? I think we will tend to continue to be doubly committed in some areas because it's sensible risk taking. We can't, with the size of our armed forces, be so specialised for events that are unlikely to happen and not say, well, actually, whilst you're doing this NATO commitment, we can actually employ you doing something else. I think that's going to continue. But we can manage better how we go about that. And then the other piece that goes with it is, I think, a dilemma. The people I speak to that deploy and are away, actually, that's what they joined up to do, and that's what they enjoy, and that's where we get stronger. The bit that I think people get frustrated by is when they feel that they get messed around because they didn't expect to be turned around so quickly, or they seem to be being turned around for something that doesn't seem that big and significant. That's the bit where I think we can improve. But I think we're still going to be doing some of the double hatting and triple hatting that you're talking about.
Thank you very much. The CDS, the STR sets out a vision for UK defence in 2035. How do you think that the role of the Chief of the Defence Staff will be different come 2035?
I think some of the fundamentals won't change. So the Chief of Defence Staff role is to advise the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary as their principal military advisor. That's going to be the same. I think we will. Yeah, we've just the formality of taking command of the three services and strategic command, and that having bedded in and being a much more cohesive group. I would hope that's become normalised. And then I think the other bit that I reflect on is we will continue to keep joining up with other parts of government. This thing called security is not just physical military security, and that feels to me that that's a modern phenomenon that is going to get stronger. And then I'd also go back to the other conversation that if we talk in my generation, the sort of maritime, land, air, the space cyber piece, and with that autonomy and the familiarity with autonomy and the speed at which defence is going to strengthen, and the way that warfighting is going to get even faster, that feels that's the challenge for 10 years' time. And can you be assured that your systems are going to be faster than your opponents? And if at the moment we are faster and the time degradations are quite large, I think the time degradations in 10 years' time are going to be the risk being tiny, but if you are not ahead, you risk being wiped out. So I think it's going to be tougher in 10 years' time than it is now.
Okay. Well, Admiral, as I set out at the beginning of our session, that given the announcement that you are due to step down from your role later this year, I wanted on behalf of the House of Commons Defence Committee to thank you for your service to the country, and also wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight some of your greatest hits, as they would say. But during your time at CDS, what is the one thing that you are most proud of?
So, firstly, thank you for those comments. So, actually, for me, genuinely, I never expected to be Chief of Defence Staff. I've never expected to be First Sea Lord. It's an amazing privilege to be in this role. I've got to thank the men and women that serve us. So that's that sense that all these people have got your back for this, enormous responsibility. And the quality of those people, and then you link it to, and it's not just men and women in uniform, you link it to our civil servants, the intelligence agencies and so on. It's an amazing role and privilege to have. And then if you're you go to things like the NATO Chiefs of Defence, and you're in a room with 31 other Chiefs of Defence. That's a real privilege, it's humbling, and that's how we stay safe. So there's an enormous thank you. I'm proud. I do an in-brief for Prime Ministers, and I've been, I think, I've had 4 Prime Ministers, 3 Defence Secretaries, a change of monarch. It's been an incredible time with the war in Europe, with the conflict in the Middle East. We've had those challenges with responding in South Sudan. We respond for a potential evacuation in Lebanon. There's a whole host of other things that our special forces do on this daily basis, and they are incredible. But when I talk to a UK British Prime Minister, I say that they should assume that the role of the military is to keep the country safe. And if we get this use of the military instrument right, we give added agency and authority to a UK Prime Minister. And that's clear on the international stage. And if we get it super right, that agency and authority of a British Prime Minister transcends the international stage, and it also helps them with their domestic agenda. I think that's what our military instrument has been doing. I think it's supported every Prime Minister. I think you've seen that with how we've responded with Ukraine, but it's also how we've responded on everything that we've been asked to do. That's the proudest thing for me. And then I would offer the challenge going forward is that we're going into a new era. Peace dividend has ended. We're shifting to a new era. There's a third nuclear age. There are geopolitical challenges. But my message would be, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay because we've got these brilliant people that support us. But our construct is nuclear. It's NATO. It's America as our principal ally. And that's what we need to bind to at the same time that we reform and that we're willing to do things differently and we're willing to test ourselves about how we change. So that's how it feels. I'm not quite at I'm about to walk out the door. So if I'm honest, it feels I've still got quite a busy day job and I've got to get on with that. But and the bit that you always have when you're coming to the end of your watch is, right, can you make sure there's not a calamity as you're about to hand over? So that I kind of get slightly anxious. Right, can we make sure that doesn't happen? And then I come back to it's been an enormous privilege, and I've enjoyed it. So which feels lucky.
You're very, very right. And that it is a huge honour and a privilege to serve as the Chief of the Defence Staff for the nation. And you have had an illustrious career, without doubt. But if you had your time once again, is there anything that you would do differently?
I suppose lots of things. I would push the reform to go further and faster. I felt that I did that in the Navy and made some progress. I've said this thing, you have these systems and people tell you about, are you taking a bit too much risk? Are you doing too much? Are you trying to go too quickly? I challenge the system to sort of how I would love us to be going too fast, and guess what? We would slow down. But we never get to the point where it feels that we're going too fast. So go further and faster. When I look at some of the threats that are out there, I I regret that I used to have calls with General Gerasimov. I saw General Gerasimov with the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace about 10 days before Russia decided to invade Ukraine. In a dangerous world, not having those mill-to-mill communications, that's a regret. And then the other bit, which is a theme, I get criticised for being too optimistic, and people challenge me that we're being complacent. I worry that we have a tendency to denigrate. And hold on, yeah, we are this phenomenal nation with these phenomenal allies, with these incredible people. Right, let's grab that confidence, and it's that confidence and facing down threats that will keep us safe. And I would encourage us to celebrate some of the good whilst we're getting after the bad, and I think we struggle to do that.
Thank you, Rowan. That's some very, very sage advice. And on that high note, I'd like to bring today's proceedings to a close. Thank you so much, Admiral, for appearing before the committee again. Order